Admiral, we have incoming transmission from unknown vessels. They're big, sir. Admiral Tobias Kane's coffee cup trembled in his grip as he stared through the observation deck of the transport ship New Horizon, watching crystalline structures emerge from the star field like geometric nightmares. Each alien vessel dwarfed his entire refugee convoy, their surfaces refracting starlight into prismatic rainbows that should have been beautiful but felt ominous against the black void. "How big?" Kane asked, though the question was pointless. Through the transparent aluminum windows he could see for himself. The lead alien ship stretched across his field of vision like a floating city, its faceted hull catching and scattering light from a dozen different angles. "Dreadnought class minimum, maybe bigger. Sir, there are 7 of them." Kane set down his cup and turned toward the communication station, his reflection ghosting across the window. A man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that had seen too many tactical scenarios play out badly. Behind him, through the ship's corridors, 50,000 human voices created a constant background murmur of conversation, children's laughter, and the subtle mechanical sounds of life support systems working at maximum capacity. "Patch me through to the lead vessel, full diplomatic protocols." The communication officer's fingers danced across his console, establishing contact across the void between species that had never spoken before. Static filled the bridge speakers, then cleared into something that sounded almost like music, crystalline tones that formed patterns resembling language. "Unknown human vessels, you are in violation of hegemony space. Identify your purpose and prepare for inspection." Kane straightened his uniform, aware that first impressions between civilizations might determine whether 50,000 civilians lived or died in the next few minutes. "This is Admiral Tobias Kane of the Terran Colonial Defense Network. We are refugees fleeing stellar instabilities in the Outer Rim colonies. We request safe passage and temporary asylum while we search for suitable relocation worlds." The alien response came without hesitation, delivered in tones that carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Supreme Arbiter Nexus Prime of the Vorthak Dominion. Your species is unknown to our databases. Submit to boarding procedures for biological assessment." Kane glanced at his tactical display, noting the positioning of the alien fleet, a perfect envelopment formation that would prevent any escape attempt. His convoy consisted of converted cargo vessels and passenger liners armed with nothing more dangerous than mining equipment and emergency beacon transmitters. The aliens could vaporize his entire fleet without sustaining a scratch. "Supreme Arbiter, we come in peace. Our vessels carry complete archives of human scientific achievements, cultural treasures, and artistic works. We offer these as gifts in exchange for safe passage and the opportunity to prove our species' value to galactic civilization." Through the observation window, Kane watched smaller alien craft detach from the motherships like glittering insects, their hull configurations suggesting advanced scanning capabilities rather than weapons systems. "Initial contact protocols, standard procedure for any reasonable civilization. Admiral Kane, your biological signatures indicate a carbon-based sapient species with standard neural complexity. However, your vessel configurations and population density suggest reproductive patterns that exceed sustainable parameters for resource-limited environments." Kane felt his stomach drop as the alien's clinical assessment continued. There was something in those crystalline tones, not Moss, Alice, but the detached precision of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. "Supreme Arbiter, humanity has successfully managed population growth through technological innovation and space colonization. Our species has developed sustainable resource management techniques that—" "Admiral Kane, you misunderstand our concern. Vorthak evolutionary philosophy recognizes that unchecked population expansion inevitably leads to resource competition and territorial conflicts. Our species achieved stellar civilization by implementing systematic population controls that eliminated genetic inefficiencies and behavioral instabilities." The words carried implications that Kane's military mind processed with horrible clarity. He activated his personal communication link, transmitting on encrypted frequencies to every ship in his convoy. "All vessels, this is Kane. Begin immediate evacuation preparations. Priority Alpha protocols. Do not acknowledge this transmission. On his tactical display, green dots began moving throughout the convoy as ship captains quietly prepared their crews for emergency evacuations without alerting the alien sensors to unusual activity. His brother Marcus, commanding the hospital ship Mercy, acknowledged the signal with a brief pulse of navigation lights, a gesture that Kane would replay in his memory for the rest of his life. Supreme Arbiter, our species has much to offer galactic civilization. We've developed advanced medical technologies, breakthrough physics theories, and unique artistic traditions that— Admiral Kane, your offers are irrelevant. The Hegemony Alliance has implemented biological quarantine protocol for all previously unknown sapient species. Your reproductive rate and technological development patterns indicate potential resource competition with established civilizations. Sterilization procedures will commence in 30 minutes. The communication channel closed with a sound like breaking crystal. Kane stood, in the sudden silence of his bridge, processing the casual way the alien had announced genocide while his crew stared at their instruments in stunned disbelief. Around him, the refugee convoy continued its slow journey through space, 50,000 human beings unaware that they had just been condemned to death by creatures who viewed their existence as a resource management problem. All stations, this is Admiral Kane. Execute priority Alpha evacuation now. All ships scatter on my mark. Emergency beacon transmitters to maximum power. If anyone survives this, they need to know what happened here. Through the observation windows, the alien fleet began repositioning itself with mechanical precision, their crystalline hulls gleaming as weapons systems powered up. Kane watched his convoy breaking apart, transport ships releasing life pods, passenger liners launching emergency shuttles, cargo vessels expelling their human cargo into the vacuum of space inside protective capsules. The hospital ship, Mercy, carrying 3,000 critically ill refugees and medical personnel, tried to maneuver away from the formation. Kane watched through his tactical display as his brother Marcus transmitted a final message. Tobias, tell them we tried. Tell them we died trying to save lives. The first antimatter beam struck Mercy amidships, vaporizing the hospital vessel in a flash of nuclear fire that left nothing but expanding plasma and the echo of 50-year-old brotherhood dissolved into atomic particles. Kane's tactical genius, honed through decades of military service, manifested in the next 6 hours as he orchestrated the most complex evacuation in human history while under fire from weapons that could crack planets. He salvaged 12,000 lives from certain death through brilliant positioning of debris fields, innovative use of stellar phenomena for cover, and split-second timing that turned disaster into partial salvation. But 38,000 human beings died in the vacuum of space while Kane watched, his tactical displays tracking each life as it winked out of existence under the methodical extermination protocols of creatures who viewed genocide as evolutionary hygiene. When the massacre ended, 12 ships limped away from the graveyard, carrying survivors who had witnessed the systematic execution of their families, friends, and neighbors. Kane's convoy had become a funeral procession carrying the weight of species-defining trauma. The tactical recordings captured everything, every death, every failed escape attempt, every moment when superior alien technology demonstrated humanity's complete helplessness against enemies who killed not from hatred, but from the clinical application of survival principles that turned love into liability and hope into strategic weakness. The briefing room on Terran Defense Station Alpha smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee, but Admiral Tobias Kane could still taste the metallic tang of fear that had filled his mouth during those 6 hours of watching human beings die in vacuum. 12,000 survivors sat in temporary housing throughout the station, their testimonies creating a constant background hum of grief that penetrated even the soundproofed military sections. Admiral Marcus Thorne, Kane's former mentor and current superior, stood before the holographic display showing tactical recordings from the massacre. The images played in silence, transport ships disintegrating under alien fire, escape pods being systematically hunted down, the moment when the hospital ship Mercy vanished in nuclear flame with Kane's brother aboard. "Turn it off," Kane said, his voice hoarse from 3 days of debriefing sessions. "I've seen it enough times." "Have you?" Thorne studied Kane's face with the analytical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years evaluating military personnel under stress. "Because according to Dr. Vega's preliminary assessment, you've watched these recordings approximately 200 times since your return. That's not normal grief processing, Tobias. That's something else entirely." Kane's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, a detail that would have embarrassed him a week ago, but now felt irrelevant compared to the weight of 38,000 deaths pressing against his consciousness. "I keep seeing things I missed. Tactical opportunities. Better evacuation patterns. If I'd positioned the convoy differently, if I'd anticipated their weapons range, if I'd—" "Stop." Thorne's voice carried the authority that had once guided Kane through his first combat commands. "You saved 12,000 lives against impossible odds. No other commander in the fleet could have managed that evacuation under those conditions." 12,000. Kane's laugh carried no humor. "Marcus had 3,000 patients aboard Mercy. I watched my own brother die because I couldn't calculate the alien firing solutions fast enough to warn him away from their targeting zones. What kind of tactical genius lets his brother fly into a kill zone?" Dr. Alex Vega entered the briefing room carrying a portable medical scanner and a thick file of psychological evaluations. The military psychologist was a compact man in his 50s whose gentle manner concealed a mind capable of dissecting human motivation with surgical precision. "Admiral Kane, your guilt response is creating cognitive patterns I've never seen before," Vega announced without preamble, his scanner beeping as it recorded Kane's neural activity. "Your brain is processing tactical information at approximately 3 times normal capacity. Pattern recognition, probability calculations, strategic visualization, all enhanced beyond standard parameters." Kane stared at the doctor. "You're telling me that watching my brother die made me smarter. I'm telling you that survivor guilt is fundamentally changing how your mind approaches problem solving. You're not just remembering the refugees who died, you're carrying them with you, using their deaths as motivation to achieve tactical perfection that might prevent similar losses in the future." Thorne leaned forward, his weathered face showing the first signs of understanding. "Show him the other cases, Doctor." Vega activated his personal display, showing psychological profiles from across the survivor fleet. "Captain Torres from the Transport Endurance. His tactical performance has improved 200% since losing his daughter in the massacre. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who watched her entire extended family die aboard the passenger liner Hope. She's developed strategic innovation capabilities that our best War College graduates can't match." Kane studied the data, his enhanced pattern recognition immediately identifying correlations between personal loss and tactical enhancement. "It's not just guilt, it's responsibility. We're carrying the weight of specific people we failed to save, and that weight is sharpening us." "Exactly." Vega's scanner registered another spike in Kane's neural activity. "Traditional military psychology assumes that trauma degrades performance, but your survivors are demonstrating the opposite effect. The more personal responsibility they feel for the dead, the more their tactical thinking approaches genius levels." Thorne stood and walked to the window overlooking the civilian refugee sections, where 12,000 humans tried to rebuild lives shattered by systematic genocide. The Terran Defense Network has been largely ceremonial for 3 generations. No major conflicts, no existential threats, no reason to maintain serious military capabilities. But these recordings... He gestured toward the holographic display, still, showing alien ships hunting human escape pods. "These change everything." Kane felt something crystallizing in his mind, not just the tactical patterns he'd been obsessing over, but a broader strategic framework that incorporated survivor guilt as an operational asset. Marcus, we need to militarize, not just rebuild the fleet, but completely reimagine how humans approach warfare. The Colonial Assembly will never approve full military mobilization based on a single incident, Thorne replied. They'll call it overreaction, waste of resources, paranoid response to. Show them the recordings. Kane's voice carried new authority, the confidence of a man whose tactical thinking had been burned pure by personal failure. Every civilian leader, every colonial administrator, every person with influence over industrial capacity. Show them children dying in vacuum while their parents scream for help that never comes. Show them medical ships being targeted deliberately. Show them systematic genocide conducted by creatures who view our existence as a resource management problem. Dr. Vega's scanner registered patterns that made him step back from Kane with something approaching professional awe. Tobias, your neural activity is off the charts. Whatever's happening in your brain, it's not just tactical enhancement. It's complete cognitive restructuring around the goal of never failing to protect people again. Kane turned toward the holographic display, watching his brother's ship die for the 201st time. But now he saw details his grief-enhanced pattern recognition had missed before. Firing angles that could have been exploited. Cover positions among the asteroid debris. Evacuation timing that might have saved 300 more lives aboard the transport vessel Horizon. Every person who died in that convoy becomes part of our tactical database, Kane said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Not as statistics, but as individuals whose deaths teach us how to fight better. We carry them with us, their faces, their names, their final moments, and we use that weight to achieve tactical perfection that honors their sacrifice. Thorne and Vega exchanged glances that mixed concern with fascination as they watched Kane transform before their eyes. The grieving brother was disappearing, replaced by something harder and more focused, a military mind that had weaponized its own trauma. Dr. Vega, I want you to study every survivor from the convoy, Kane ordered. Document the cognitive changes, analyze the tactical enhancements, develop training protocols that can replicate these effects in other personnel. If guilt makes us better warriors, then we need to learn how to channel guilt into strategic advantages. Tobias, Thorne said carefully, what you're describing sounds like deliberately traumatizing our own people to improve their combat performance. Kane met his mentor's eyes with the steady gaze of a man who had calculated the exact cost of tactical failure in human lives. Marcus, 38,000 people died because I wasn't good enough to save them. If their deaths can teach us how to save billions more, then failing to use those lessons would be the real crime. Every tactical innovation we develop from survivor guilt honors the people we couldn't protect. Through the observation windows, the lights of the refugee quarters twinkled like stars, each one representing someone who had lost family, friends, entire communities to alien systematic extermination. But Kane no longer saw them as victims. He saw them as the foundation for humanity's evolution into something the galaxy had never encountered before. A species that could transform its deepest wounds into its most devastating weapons. 6 months after the massacre, Kane stood in the tactical simulation chamber of the rebuilt warship Retribution, watching Captain Elena Santos coordinate a boarding action against a virtual hegemony vessel. Santos moved with the fluid precision of someone whose mind had been sharpened by loss. Her husband and twin daughters had died aboard the transport Odyssey, and their memory drove her tactical thinking to levels that impressed even Kane's enhanced analytical capabilities. Captain Santos, explain your reasoning for the starboard breach point, Kane requested through the communication system. Santos paused her simulation, her face reflecting the internal weight she carried. Sir, my daughter Maria always said that surprises work best when they come from where people feel safest. The starboard docking bay is where the aliens would evacuate their own wounded. They won't expect us to breach through their medical sections because it violates logical military protocol. Kane nodded, recognizing the tactical innovation that emerged from personal grief transformed into strategic insight. Santos wasn't just planning a military operation, She was fighting to prove that her children hadn't died for nothing, and that desperation created tactical creativity that no military academy could teach. Continue the simulation. Show me how Maria's wisdom translates to battlefield effectiveness. Supreme Arbiter Nexus Prime observed the human military buildup through quantum surveillance networks that monitored electromagnetic signatures across 17 star systems. The data streams revealed patterns that challenged every assumption in hegemony tactical databases. Humans were developing warfare techniques that violated fundamental principles of logical military strategy. Intelligence Coordinator Vex 7 explained these human behavioral anomalies, Nexus Prime requested, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies that indicated analytical confusion. The subordinate Vorthak accessed classified surveillance data through direct neural interface, projecting tactical assessments into the shared consciousness space. Supreme Arbiter, human military commanders appear to be making strategic decisions based on emotional parameters rather than logical cost-benefit calculations. Their tactical innovations demonstrate creativity patterns that our predictive algorithms cannot model. Nexus Prime reviewed footage of human training exercises where officers deliberately exposed themselves to recordings of the refugee massacre before conducting strategic planning sessions. The practice violated every known principle of military psychology, yet somehow produced tactical solutions that exceeded the capabilities of purely logical minds. These humans designate their training program as Memorial Combat Doctrine, Vex 7 continued. Each commander adopts psychological responsibility for specific individuals who died during our quarantine protocol implementation. They appear to use guilt as a cognitive enhancer. Through the quantum feeds, Nexus Prime observed a human officer named Lieutenant Torres planning assault patterns while staring at photographs of dead children. The man's tactical solutions incorporated variables that no hegemony computer could calculate, variables based on desperate creativity born from the refusal to fail again. Fascinating. The humans have discovered a method of weaponizing psychological trauma that transforms cognitive limitations into strategic advantages. Continue monitoring their development. Kane received the alert at 0347 hours. Hegemony scouts had engaged human patrol vessels near Kepler Station, providing the first operational test of Memorial Combat Doctrine under actual combat conditions. He reached the command center within minutes, where Admiral Thorne was coordinating fleet movements through tactical displays that showed human vessels maneuvering with unprecedented coordination. "Tobias, you need to see this," Thorne announced, highlighting communication feeds from the battle zone. "Our commanders aren't following standard engagement protocols. They're improvising tactics that I've never seen before, and somehow it's working." Kane listened to Captain Rodriguez broadcasting from his fighter squadron as they engaged hegemony interceptors. "This one's for the Martinez family from Transport Delta 7. Remember how little Anna wanted to be a pilot when she grew up? Let's give her some wings." The fighter squadron executed a coordinated ramming attack that destroyed 3 alien vessels while losing only 1 human craft. Rodriguez had volunteered for the suicide run because his enhanced tactical thinking recognized that sacrificing 1 pilot to save 17 others honored the memory of refugees he'd failed to protect during the convoy massacre. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the boarding action on hegemony cruiser designation Alpha Prime," the communications officer announced. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes is transmitting tactical updates." Hayes's voice crackled through the speakers, punctuated by weapon fire and the sounds of close-quarters combat. "Command, we're fighting room by room through their vessel, but these aliens, they don't understand what we're doing. Every door we breach, every corridor we clear, we're calling out names of refugees from the convoy. They think we're conducting some kind of religious ceremony, but we're actually using memory of the dead to coordinate tactical movements that their defensive algorithms can't predict." Kane watched the tactical displays showing human forces achieving impossible objectives through battlefield innovations that transformed personal loss into strategic genius. His enhanced pattern recognition identified the common factor: Each human commander was fighting not just for military victory, but to prove worthy of the trust placed in them by people they had failed to save. Admiral Thorne, we're seeing proof of concept. Memorial combat doctrine works because it gives our people something no logical species can understand: the motivation to achieve tactical perfection through borrowed guilt. Every refugee who died becomes a tactical advisor whose memory drives us to strategic innovations that exceed purely rational military thinking. Through the quantum surveillance networks, Nexus Prime documented battle results that defied hegemony tactical models. Human forces had inflicted 73% casualties while accepting only 11% losses, achieving victory through strategic decisions that violated fundamental principles of logical warfare. Intelligence Coordinator, explain how inferior human technology achieved tactical superiority against our advanced systems, Nexus Prime demanded, his crystalline structure resonating with frequencies indicating unprecedented analytical confusion. Supreme Arbiter, human tactical behavior demonstrates patterns we cannot compute. Their commanders make strategic decisions that prioritize emotional objectives over logical military goals, yet somehow these decisions produce optimal tactical outcomes. Our predictive algorithms fail because they cannot process warfare motivated by psychological rather than strategic parameters. Kane stood in the aftermath of humanity's first victory against the hegemony, watching casualty reports that showed human tactical doctrine had transformed personal trauma into the most effective military innovation in galactic history. Each human death in battle had been voluntarily accepted to achieve objectives that honored the memory of refugees who died during the convoy massacre. Dr. Vega approached with neural scan results that documented cognitive changes in surviving human commanders. Tobias, the battle has accelerated the psychological transformations we observed after the massacre. Our commanders aren't just carrying guilt anymore. They're carrying the tactical wisdom of the dead, using memory as a strategic database that enhances their ability to protect others. Kane nodded, understanding that humanity had discovered something that would forever change the nature of warfare in the galaxy. They had learned to weaponize love itself, transforming the bonds between the living and the dead into tactical advantages that no logical species could counter or predict. Begin implementation of full memorial combat doctrine across all human military forces, Kane ordered. Every commander adopts responsibility for specific refugees from the convoy. Every tactical decision honors the memory of people we failed to save. Every battle becomes an opportunity to prove worthy of their trust. The universe was about to discover that humans had evolved beyond conventional warfare into something far more dangerous, a species that could transform its deepest losses into its most devastating weapons. The refugee convoy at Procyon Prime stretched across 1,000,000 cubic kilometers of space, 200,000 human civilians fleeing the latest hegemony quarantine action, while Admiral Tobias Kane's battle group of 180 vessels prepared to face 400 alien warships in the largest engagement since the development of memorial combat doctrine. Admiral, the alien fleet is assuming standard envelopment formation, reported Captain Santos from her position aboard the cruiser Remembrance. They're positioning for systematic extermination protocols, just like at the convoy. Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship Retribution, staring through the observation ports at crystalline alien vessels that gleamed like deadly jewelry against the star field. Each enemy ship represented superior technology, overwhelming firepower, and tactical doctrine refined through centuries of galactic conquest. But Kane's enhanced pattern recognition, sharpened by months of carrying the weight of 38,000 dead refugees, saw something the aliens couldn't anticipate. All ships, this is Kane. Memorial combat protocol is now active. Remember who we carry with us. Remember who we failed to save. Today, we prove their trust wasn't misplaced. Supreme Arbiter Nexus Prime commanded the hegemony fleet from his dreadnought Eternal Purity, his crystalline consciousness directly interfacing with tactical systems that calculated victory probabilities approaching certainty. The human fleet possessed captured alien technology and converted civilian vessels, but their inferior numbers and improvised equipment offered no mathematical path to success. Tactical Coordinator, initiate quarantine protocols, Nexus Prime commanded. Document human combat responses for analysis. These creatures' recent tactical innovations require direct observation. The first exchange of fire lit the space around Procyon Prime with nuclear flame as human vessels engaged hegemony forces with desperation that Nexus Prime recognized from previous encounters. But something felt different about their tactical coordination. Instead of conventional formation fighting, the humans moved with fluid precision that seemed to anticipate hegemony responses before they occurred. "This is Captain Rodriguez aboard frigate Marcus Kane," came the transmission across all human frequencies. "I carry the memory of Dr. Sarah Hendricks and her 5-year-old son Tommy from transport vessel Odyssey. They believed in us to protect them. Today, we prove worthy of their trust." Rodriguez's frigate accelerated directly toward the hegemony battleship Crystalline Dominance, its hull glowing from engine overload as the captain pushed his vessel beyond safe operational limits. The ramming attack should have been suicide, a pointless gesture that would accomplish nothing except the death of Rodriguez and his crew. Instead, the frigate's impact created a breach in the battleship's forward armor that allowed boarding shuttles to penetrate the alien vessel's interior. Rodriguez had calculated the exact impact angle needed to compromise structural integrity, while his crew transmitted final messages to families they would never see again. Target acquired. For Tommy Hendricks, who wanted to see the stars when he grew up. Give him this one, boys. The frigate struck the alien battleship with nuclear precision, its sacrifice opening corridors where human boarding parties fought room by room through crystalline passages while calling out names of refugees whose memory guided their tactical movements. Nexus Prime observed this exchange through tactical feeds that recorded data his analytical systems couldn't process. The human sacrifice had achieved a strategic objective, breaching an otherwise impregnable defensive position, but the decision-making process defied logical military analysis. No rational commander would trade a frigate and 30 crew members for a boarding opportunity. Intelligence Coordinator, explain human tactical reasoning, Nexus Prime demanded. Supreme Arbiter, their combat decisions appear motivated by psychological rather than strategic parameters. They are not fighting to achieve military objectives, they are fighting to honor obligations to dead individuals who cannot benefit from victory. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out as Memorial Combat Doctrine reached full operational capacity. Fighter squadrons led by Commander Hayes executed coordinated kamikaze runs against hegemony command vessels, each pilot broadcasting names of specific children who had died during the original convoy massacre. Entire crews volunteered for missions with zero survival probability because their enhanced tactical thinking recognized that certain victories could only be achieved through perfect sacrifice. This is Commander Hayes leading Ghost Squadron. Sarah Martinez, age 7, loved butterflies and wanted to be a scientist. Jessica Thompson, age 9, drew pictures of spaceships and dreamed of exploring nebula. Today, they get their wings and their stars. Hayes's squadron struck the hegemony fleet coordination vessel in synchronized strikes that disabled the alien tactical network. 12 human pilots died to achieve what conventional tactics could never accomplish. The complete disruption of enemy fleet coordination through precisely targeted sacrifice that honored specific children whose trust they had failed to earn. Kane watched the battle unfold through tactical displays that showed human forces achieving impossible objectives through innovative combinations of captured alien technology and tactical creativity born from survivor guilt. His ships fought with the desperate precision of beings trying to resurrect the dead through victory, and somehow their emotional motivation was generating strategic advantages that pure logic couldn't counter. "Admiral, we're penetrating their defensive perimeter," Santos reported from Remembrance. "The aliens can't predict our tactical responses because we're not fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting to prove worthy of trust placed in us by people who are already dead." Kane nodded, understanding that memorial combat doctrine had transformed humanity's greatest weakness, the inability to forget those they had failed, into their most devastating tactical advantage. Every human death in battle was voluntarily accepted to honor refugees whose memory demanded nothing less than perfect strategic execution. All ships, prepare for final assault on enemy flagship. Target, Supreme Arbiter Nexus Prime. Objective, face-to-face demonstration that human tactical evolution makes us uncounterable. Kane's boarding shuttle Penetra, Ted Nexus Prime's dreadnought through breaches created by human sacrifice, carrying assault teams who fought through crystalline corridors while reciting names and personal details of refugees who had died during the convoy massacre. Each room they cleared, each defensive position they overcame, became a memorial service conducted with close-quarters combat and tactical innovation driven by borrowed guilt. Michael Torres, age 12, wanted to be an engineer like his father, Kane announced as his team breached the command center where Nexus Prime waited behind energy barriers that should have been impregnable. Emma Chen, age 6, loved drawing pictures of flowers. David Williams, age 14, played violin and composed music that made his grandmother cry with joy. The assault team's weapons fire, guided by tactical thinking enhanced through survivor guilt, found weaknesses in alien defensive systems that pure military training could never have identified. They fought with the desperate creativity of beings who viewed victory as the only acceptable proof of worthiness for trust placed in them by the dead. Nexus Prime faced Kane across his command center, his crystalline consciousness experiencing something unprecedented in Vorthak evolutionary history, the recognition that emotional motivation could generate military capabilities that logical analysis couldn't predict or counter. Human Kane, your tactical innovations violate fundamental principles of rational warfare, Nexus Prime stated, his voice resonating with frequencies that indicated analytical confusion. Your species fights for objectives that provide no strategic benefit to living beings. Kane met the alien's gaze with eyes that carried the weight of 38,000 personal failures transformed into tactical fuel. Supreme Arbiter, we fight for the trust of people whose belief in us survived Eve and their own deaths. That motivation creates strategic capabilities your logic-based systems can never understand or defeat. Through the command center's observation ports, the hegemony fleet scattered in full retreat as human tactical unpredictability overwhelmed superior technology through emotional warfare that transformed personal trauma into perfect strategic execution. 200,000 refugees escaped under human protection while their guardians proved worthy of trust placed in them by those who would never live to see the victory their memory had made possible. 3 years after the Battle of Procyon Prime, Admiral Tobias Kane stood in the Memorial Hall of the Refugee Defense Corps headquarters, surrounded by holographic displays showing the faces and personal histories of 38,000 human beings whose deaths had become the foundation for humanity's revolutionary approach to warfare. Each image represented not just a casualty, but a tactical advisor whose memory continued to guide strategic thinking throughout human space. Admiral Kane, we have confirmation from 7 different intelligence networks, reported Dr. Alex Vega, now Director of Tactical Psychology for the entire human military structure. The Hegemony Alliance has officially dissolved. Member species are abandoning the coalition rather than face forces that can weaponize emotional bonds into uncounterable military advantages. Kane nodded, studying reports from across the galaxy that documented the collapse of the most powerful military alliance in known space. The dissolution hadn't resulted from overwhelming human force or superior technology. It had emerged from the simple recognition that humanity had evolved beyond conventional warfare into something that logical species couldn't combat or comprehend. "Show me Nexus Prime's final transmission," Kane requested. The holographic display activated, showing the crystalline form of the Supreme Arbiter in his prison cell aboard the research vessel Absolutio. In his message, transmitted to Vorthak High Command before his capture, had been intercepted by human intelligence and subsequently leaked across galactic communication networks. Vorthak High Council, this is final analysis from Supreme Arbiter Nexus Prime regarding species classification 847 human. The alien's voice carried frequencies that indicated unprecedented analytical breakdown. These beings have developed warfare capabilities that transcend logical tactical doctrine. They transform psychological trauma into strategic advantages through methods our predictive systems cannot compute. They fight not for territorial expansion or resource acquisition, but to honor obligations to dead individuals who cannot benefit from victory. Kane watched his former enemy's warnings spread across star charts showing communication relays throughout known space. The message had reached over 400 different civilizations within months, creating what xenosociologists were calling the first galaxy-wide recognition of a new form of warfare. They weaponize their greatest emotional vulnerabilities, Nexus Prime continued in his transmission. Personal failure becomes tactical fuel. Survivor guilt generates strategic innovations. Love for the dead creates military capabilities that no logical analysis can predict or counter. Any species that threatens human civilian populations will face opponents whose emotional bonds drive them to tactical perfection that exceeds the possibilities of rational military thinking. Through the Memorial Hall's observation windows, Kane could see the training facilities where thousands of human officers learned to channel personal loss into strategic advantages. The Refugee Defense Corps had grown into humanity's primary military organization, but its doctrine had spread throughout every branch of human space defense. Commander Santos approached, carrying files that documented the program's expansion across 17 colonial systems. Her own tactical abilities, enhanced through carrying the memory of her husband and twin daughters, had made her Kane's most trusted strategic advisor. "Admiral, the Memorial Combat Doctrine integration is complete," Santos reported. "Every human military commander now adopts psychological responsibility for specific individuals from the original convoy massacre. The dead have become our tactical database, their trust, our motivation to achieve strategic perfection." Kane opened one of the files, reading testimonials from officers whose combat effectiveness had increased exponentially after embracing borrowed guilt as cognitive enhancement. Captain Torres, whose accuracy with artillery systems approached supernatural levels because he fought to honor his daughter's memory. Lieutenant Hayes, whose fighter squadron tactics demonstrated creativity that military academies couldn't teach because they emerged from desperate love transformed into strategic innovation. "Elena, we've created something that will fundamentally change warfare throughout the galaxy," Kane observed. "Every human military engagement becomes a memorial service where we prove worthy of trust placed in us by people who believed we could protect them even when we failed." Dr. Vega joined them, carrying neural scan results that documented the permanent cognitive changes in human military personnel. "Tobias, the psychological transformations are becoming hereditary. Children of Memorial Combat veterans show enhanced pattern recognition and tactical thinking from birth. We're not just using guilt as a weapon, we're evolving into a species whose military capabilities are literally powered by love for the dead." Kane studied the research data, understanding that humanity had discovered something that would echo through galactic history for millennia. They had learned that emotional bonds weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strategic resources to be weaponized through perfect memory of imperfect love. The universe spent millions of years assuming that logical thinking produced superior military capabilities, Kane reflected. But we've proven that emotional motivation can generate tactical innovations that pure rationality can never match. Every species that threatens human families will face opponents whose love for the dead makes them tactically unbeatable. Through the memorial displays, Kane could see the faces of refugees whose deaths had taught humanity to transform its deepest wounds into its most devastating weapons. Michael Torres, who wanted to be an engineer. Emma Chen, who loved flowers. David Williams, who composed music that made his grandmother weep with joy. Their trust, unearned but freely given, had become the foundation for military doctrine that no logical species could counter. Admiral, we're receiving requests from over 30 different civilizations for defensive alliance treaties, Santos reported. Species that have never contacted humans before are offering tribute and cooperation rather than risk facing memorial combat doctrine in actual warfare. Kane smiled, recognizing the completion of humanity's transformation from victims of systematic genocide to the most feared military force in galactic history. They had achieved this position not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through the simple recognition that love for the dead could be weaponized into tactical perfection. Accept the Alliance requests. Establish the Refugee Protection Accord. Any civilization that signs the treaty receives human military protection against systematic extermination campaigns. Any species that targets civilian populations faces the full implementation of memorial combat doctrine. As Kane walked through the memorial hall one final time, he reflected on the journey that had transformed him from a failed protector into the architect of humanity's evolutionary leap beyond conventional warfare. 38,000 refugees had died believing that human beings would somehow find a way to honor their trust, even after death. They had been right. The galaxy now recognized that emotional bonds weren't humanity's weakness. They were evolutionary military advantages that transformed personal failure into tactical perfection, survivor guilt into strategic genius, and love for the dead into the most devastating weapon the universe had ever encountered. Kane paused before the holographic display showing his brother Marcus, whose death aboard the hospital ship Mercy had become the first lesson in humanity's education about turning tragedy into tactical innovation. The weight of carrying specific dead individuals as strategic advisors had spread throughout human civilization, creating a species that fought not just for victory, but for worthiness of trust placed in them by those who would never live to see their faith justified. The universe had learned that there was no force more dangerous than humans who loved their dead enough to weaponize that love into perfect tactical execution, ensuring that every genocide committed against them became the foundation for military capabilities that no logical species could understand, predict, or survive. Human civilization had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or explorers, but as guardians whose emotional bonds with the dead made them tactically invincible protectors of the living. If this story gave you chills about turning tragedy into tactical genius, smash that subscribe button for more HFY stories. Now we want to hear from you. What human trait do you think would be most terrifying if weaponized against alien civilizations? Stubbornness? Revenge? Our refusal to give up? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where love becomes the universe's most feared military doctrine.